This is the Resilient Disciples podcast powered by Awana. I'm Ross. You know who you are. Thank you for being here. I am pumped that you are here for this one. I was joined by Andrew Peterson. Andrew is a musician. He's an author. You may have heard of him through the Wingfeather saga or some of his music. And he's also a faculty member for the 2022 Child Discipleship Forum. And I got a chance to talk to him as well as Mike Handler, the Chief Communication and Innovation Officer at Awana. And we had this great conversation not only about the importance of child discipleship, the importance of place and that connection to God through that, but also Andrew just has a ton of practical wisdom in this conversation about how critically important it is for whatever your ministry looks like, whatever your context looks like, to love what you've been given. And I really hope you enjoy the conversation. Thanks for listening. I am so excited because today I am joined by Andrew Peterson, who is I almost said the word legend almost came out of my mouth, Andrew, but you are you are creative, you are a musician, you are an author, you are someone who I think embodies what it means to be an artist, particularly in the year 2022. And I'm also joined by Mike Handler, who is also creative and an artist, and happens to be working as the Chief Communication Officer at Awana. So welcome both of you to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Good to be here as well. And that sounded like pandering a little bit for me, Ross, but that's all right. Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it.
We'll talk about it later. So Andrew, I just want to jump right in, man, because I think one of the things that I find most inspiring about your work, and I just alluded to that, is not only are you a musician, not only are you an author, not only are you someone who would love to talk more about the Rabbit Room, which is this community that you've created that cultivates and curates stories, music, and art to nourish Christ-centered communities for the life of the world. You're also a speaker at the 2022 Child Discipleship Forum that Mike and I will be able to talk a little bit more about. But I want to start by asking, a lot of people probably became familiar with your work who are listening because during COVID, you did a reading of the Wingfeather saga, which is one of my understanding, one of the series of your books. And a lot of people saw it. But you were someone who has been this traveling musician, and you've been all over the country, probably all over the world. And then the world stopped and you wound up being at home. And I'm just curious, what was your experience, now that COVID is in the rearview mirror for a lot of people, going from what your ministry looked like before to what your ministry had to look like during those couple of years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to say this very carefully because the whole COVID lockdown thing was really, really tough on a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I know some of those people, and it was very tough. My experience of it, though, was it was one of the greatest gifts of my whole adult life. Like I have been touring since I graduated high school and hit the road with a band and for a year, and then took a break for college. But while I was in college, I started writing my own songs, toured my last 2 years of college. As soon as I got out of college, moved to Nashville, and that was 25 years ago, and I've been doing music ever since. And so that's a lot of gate areas and a lot of airports and a lot of truck stops,
Yeah. A lot of boarding group ones. Yeah,
man. And so because of the fact that I don't just do music, I do music and I write books, and I am a part of this Rabbit Room ministry, and we're working on the Wingfeather movie thing. And so there's a lot going on. And so I have been so stressed for years, like just asking myself over and over, how did I get myself into this situation? There's so many things going on. I've got these 3 amazing adult children who I want to be around. I want to see them. I love my property and my church and my community. And I just found myself praying earnestly in 2019 for a sabbatical. And I was just like, Lord, I've got to take a break, and I don't know how to do it. And it's funny, I'm a pastor's kid, and I watched my dad as the pastor of a small church do everything, and it was hard. Like I just watched how hard he worked, and I was like, I am never going to go into the ministry. And then I went into the ministry, and then I was like, but I'm never going to let that happen. And then here I am, So when I remember we were in England doing a tour and with my little band, and just having a great time when rumors started popping up on everybody's phones. Things are getting crazy. And then we found out one day that they were closing the borders in 48 hours. And my manager was like, if you don't get on a plane soon, you might get stuck there. Which, to be fair, I thought about how nice it would be to be stuck in England for.
Yeah, there are worse places, to be sure.
Yeah, but obviously I was like, I got to get home to my family. And
Yeah.
and we came home, and man, to have a pretty much a solid year of being told you cannot do shows, you've got to stay home, was about the only way it was ever going to happen. And I think I've never been more healthy. I've never been more spiritually healthy, or I've never had such a great, easy relationship with my community and my family. I just loved it.
Yeah.
And so the rub is that now that things are getting back to normal, I feel like they're making up for lost time. You guys feeling that?
Oh
Yeah,
Like
totally.
things feel busier than they were before. And I
Totally.
don't know if that's actually what's happening or if it just feels that way. But man, I'm just like, Lord, how do I recover some of the Sabbath rest that I experienced? It was like a wake up call to make me realize this is not the way we were meant to live.
Yeah.
This constant motion, this constant American productivity, this thing, And so to be very honest with you, I'm still in a weird, like, praying a lot about it, seeking a lot of wisdom from people to figure out how to slow down. And I don't know how yet.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at. Yeah.
No, thanks for
Andrew,
sharing.
yeah, I think that you said something in there. You said a lot of things in there that resonate, I think, with a good deal of people, and that's the fact that COVID's forced us to slow down, and it forced us to kind of remember place. And in your writing, in your music, there is such a great understanding, I believe, that you put out there regarding place, regarding home, regarding these like sacred musings, almost, if you will. And can you talk to us about that a little bit? You mentioned even in your intro to your self intro, right? You love your home, you love your community. I know that for those who are listening, who know you or watching, you talk often about your property, your trees. In fact, many of your books, your more recent books, talk about that too, right? You've got this kind of this sense of place. Can you tell us, especially as it relates to the parents who are with us, or those who work with kids, tell us about that kind of almost doctrine, if you will, of place from your point of view?
Well, I'm not super good at it, as I've made clear. But I've in the Lord of the Rings, the hobbits would talk about their tookishness, this like wanderlust that they have to go see the world, mountains, Gandalf. I've got a big chunk of that in me. Like, I really do. I love the adventure. The older I've gotten, though, the more that I've just been like, you know what, I've occasionally get invitations to go play somewhere really far away. I got like an invitation to play in Dubai of all places recently, which is a place that needs the gospel, and I was just like, I can't do it. I got to be home. There's just like, but 20 years ago, I would have jumped at the chance, just anything for the adventure, And now I'm realizing the more that I get older that I just, Paul, I forget which letter where he talks about seek to live a quiet and work with your hands, aspire to live a quiet life, that kind of thing. That is resonating more and more with me as I get older. Part of it is having encountered the work of Wendell Berry, the poet and the essayist and the novelist. I read Jayber Crow, this wonderful novel about a town barber. And if I had to summarize Wendell Berry's like main thesis of his whole career, it's been, he's pushing back at the lie that the only way to be happy is to be somewhere else. And I think so many of us have that constant that nagging feeling. It's like fear of missing out. It's like, man, if this house is fine, but gosh, if I could live in a house like my neighbor's house over there, or if I could live in this state or whatever. And once we got to Nashville, and I read Jayber Crow, I read that book, and I started telling my wife, like, I want to at least move to a place where we have a fighting chance of staying there for the rest of our lives. Like, God can do what he wants. He can direct us elsewhere, but like, I didn't want to live in this weird transitory phase where I'm like, well, we're just living in this house till it appreciates and we sell it and we get a bigger one, whatever. Right. And so when we found this little piece of property, I talked her into it, and it turns out to have been one of the greatest things we ever did as a family. I feel like I have learned so much about the heart of God from living here. There's a great poem by a poet named Jeannie Walker Murray. Jeannie Murray Walker, is that her name? Anyway, she's great. She's like a contemporary of Lucy Shaw and Madeleine L'Engle, but it's this poem about Adam and Eve, and it talks about how Adam is looking at Eve and he's kind of annoyed at the name she gave the emu or something, like, and he's kind of like not quite sure that he's super pumped about this person that he's stuck with, right? And at the end, she paints this beautiful picture of how there's a lightning flashes and she comes running to him and he holds her in the storm, and he begins the long work of learning to love what he's been given.
That's good.
That last line, the long work of learning to love what you've been given. And man, that there is so much gospel wisdom in that, I think a lot of marriages have probably fallen apart because people sometimes don't know that hard work of learning to love what you've been given. Which isn't to say that there's not, marriage is incredibly complicated, but I just know that I wanted to know what that was like. And I wanted my kids to know it, so we kind of raised our kids with this idea that, hey, we're going to take care of this place. We're going to pretend like this little chunk of land on the planet is a place where God has given us to steward, and to do our best job of trying to build what we think the new creation is going to look like one day.
It's good.
And to kind of like shape this place to make it look like our best guess of where this whole story is headed.
That's good. Well, homes are such a place of hospitality and belonging too, right? I mean, it's for those who, no one's keeping up with Mike Handler's life, but we're moving right now. So like I'm sitting in the midst of a very kind of empty space here. And there is something to be said about what that sense of home can provide. Andrew, I'm just curious, as you're, have adult children now, you've probably done a lot of time reflecting, you've done a lot of probably interior work as you see your kids come into their adult lives. But, growing up as a preacher's kid, seeing your dad do the hard things of ministry, there was certainly a sense of place there, for those who are serving their community as pastors or whatever their role is in their local church. There's often that sense of place, maybe not as well expressed as you put it there, that God gave you this thing in order to kind of create what that new heaven, new earth experience might be like. But what is it like when people come over? This isn't a weird way that Ross and I are fishing for an invitation, but Ross makes a great blondie. So if you want that,
great. Yeah. Yep.
but I mean, like to be able to welcome people into your place, to maybe even, friends of kids that you may have had who were experiencing less than ideal parts of life or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Well, Jamie and I both do you remember when you were growing up, there was like the Cool House that always had good snacks?
Absolutely.
And we were just like, no matter what, we're going to be the Cool House. Like, we just want to make sure that the kids always know they can bring their friends over at the drop of a hat. And Jamie is, one of her spiritual gifts is hospitality. Like, she is so good. She, like, her priorities are just always convicting me, because I'm kind of like, what's the next thing? What are we going to do? If there's a lull in conversation, I kind of get anxious, and she will sit and shoot the breeze for days. Like, she just stops what she's doing, hangs out with the kids, and guys, sometimes we want to be playing darts. We want to be doing something.
Yeah. There's got to be some activity, right? We can't just be.
Yeah. So she's always been like good at the hang, and has taught me a lot about that. So our kids have kind of inherited that from her. So like, they come and they're just like not in a hurry. They'll hang out for hours on end. One of the little accidental things that we did was we homeschooled our kids. So there was bedtimes weren't super rigid in a great way. And so we would always pray at night, like after we'd watched a movie or whatever, we would pray. And our Apple TV at the time was set up to have a slideshow of family photos, And so we would say amen and look up from the prayer and see a picture of like our last year's family vacation. And the kids would be like, oh, that was fun when we did that. And they knew that if they could keep us talking, that they could stay up. And so it would be midnight sometimes, and we would still be sitting up there talking. And that was so much more important than them getting a good night's sleep, So I think that culture that Jamie has really brought into our home is something that I see happen. She always has a candle burning. In case somebody drops in, she wants the house to smell good, little things like that,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we try. I mean, we prayed when we moved to this place. There's a gravel driveway, to get up here. We prayed that people would sense God's peace whenever their tires hit the gravel drive. Very literally, like specifically, we prayed that thing. And it's been so crazy because over the 15 years we've lived here, people will say, man, as soon as my tires hit that gravel drive, I just feel a sense of peace. So I think that, I don't know what it's like. You'd have to ask somebody who comes over to our house, but I do feel like, in large part because Jamie is so good at it. Like we have tried to think of our home as a place that is an outpost of the kingdom of God. And so that's not always super convenient.
Yeah.
There's plenty of times when it's like, "Ooh, man, I just wish we had a night to just chill out."
Yeah.
But man, it's a rich way to live. It's good.
That's good.
I want to jump off that because I think one of the things that resonates so much with your work, I was talking to a friend of mine and she said that your music has a tethering effect on her heart, reminding her of the bigger story we all are a part of. And I think it's true in your writing. Her daughter was responding to your writing in a very similar way. And the fact is, you were able to communicate the depth, some of the beauty of what you're just describing with Mike there. But you have this almost childlike, in the best way, wonder quality to your work. There's a stillness in how you describe things that I think it becomes so easy as adults, and especially as guys, to lose track of, become cynical, become rushed in all that we're doing. And you're a human being, you're not perfect at it, but like, how do you clue back in to that childlike wonder? Because it's so easy for us to wind up like taking it for granted, the beauty and majesty of all that God is. But I know for so many of our listeners, they're working with kids every day. They should be, quote unquote, like really in this childlike wonder thing should be really easy for them. And I know it's not. Like, how do you practically reconnect with the Father?
Man, that is a good question. Man, part of it is just how I'm wired. Like I'm interested in a lot of things, and I tend to, get some wild hair and I'll just chase it. I was like, I wonder what it's like to make pizza dough. So I'll go. I think it was funny during COVID. I learned how to make pizza dough so we could have like family pizza nights.
Yeah.
And we went to the store and the guy was like, what's everybody doing with all this flour? And, we're sold out of flour. Why? It was like something in the human race woke up and said, I must learn to make sourdough bread.
Yeah, that's true.
But I don't know, like that kind of is what got me into beekeeping. It's like a way of following your nose. Like I'm curious enough to where like, I tend to let one thing lead me to another. Like that's how I'm with books. Like I remember reading C.S. Lewis, and C.S. Lewis mentioned George MacDonald, and I was like, I wonder who that guy is. And I went and found George MacDonald, and that led me to so and so. And so it's kind of like, I think life is kind of the same way, but in many ways, it's like the place that you are in suggests to you the next thing. And so, we moved here and I immediately started planting vegetables. I don't do many vegetables anymore because the deer eat them all, whatever, the bugs get them, but flowers are a blast, and flowers are like, they feel more generous to me somehow. But that led me to beekeeping. And so like, I don't know if I'm necessarily trying to do it. I just am, I don't know, the world that God made is just amazing. And I was just telling my friend, my buddy on the road last night on the way home from the show, the moon was full last night. I don't know if you guys saw it. It was beautiful. And I was telling him about one time when I was sitting on the front porch with my son, Aiden, when he was like 6. And we were looking at the moon. I was like, isn't it crazy that the moon is in space? And his jaw dropped and he goes, wait a second, the moon is in space? And I looked up and I was like, whoa, the moon is in space. Like, it was kind of this hilarious, like unfolding a realization where I was like, I was the father pointing it out to him, but his boyishness kind of realized what a wonder that is. And then to think that the moon that the Bible talks about is the same one we get to look at. It's kind of like, it's like a movie star floating around in the sky. It's like, oh, you're that character from that Psalm, I don't know. I don't know how to cultivate it. I just think it's a good thing to do. Just try to be curious about life. I think reading G.K. Chesterton's a good way to start. I mean, he was just like a big kid walking
Yeah.
around the world. You know, he loved to draw. Find something that you like to do that gets your hands dirty, and I think that you'll probably follow your nose into wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is such a temptation sometimes to put all that stuff behind, right? And the
Hmm.
almost in a Peter Pan type of way, like growing up, leaving the nursery, if you will.
Hmm.
But how have you done that even with your own kids? If we could ask, Andrew, the dad, how did you help them slow down, not to be swept up in all of the stuff, if you will? And I know that, they're in their 20s now, or
Hmm.
they're young adults, if you will. But like, how did you and Jamie stem the tide of just the pervasiveness of media technology? It's not all
Mm.
bad, to be sure.
Yeah,
We're
sure.
able to do this because of this, but yeah.
Right. I wish they were here so you could ask them that question. I would be so curious to know what
Well,
they thought.
Andrew, you may not know it, but they're right now.
Yeah.
Which
Oh
one's
my
not know?
goodness. Yeah, that would be so fun. I would be delighted. But no, so we try not to be super rigid about that kind of thing. We were rigid about video games. We
Yeah.
Man, when I was a kid, Nintendo was like the greatest thing in the world, the original, right?
Yep.
And
Blow in
it
the
was so
cartridge,
fun.
make sure that it's working. Yeah,
Totally.
totally.
Yeah. But I also remember playing GoldenEye when in 64 was a thing. So it's
Yeah.
like video games aren't inherently evil. They can be super fun if they are something that connects you with other people.
Right.
But we decided that rather than saying we would never have video games, we would say, hey, yeah, we can have a video game, but it is your Saturday morning cartoons. Like, don't even
That's
ask
good.
if you can play the rest of the week, but you don't have to ask on Saturday morning. Like, get up
That's
and
good.
play all you want. And if it's raining outside, you can order. But so we just had these like nice little boundaries that kept us from having to say no constantly. And I think it demonstrated to them that these things have their place. They need to be put aside. We plug our phone in, not by the bed, but in another room at night, so that it just little moves like that. I think I got that from Andy Crouch. But the moves like that kind of like remind you in your body that technology isn't the boss of you. And we tried to cultivate that in our kids. But I would say the main thing is just that, like, our kids had the tremendous blessing of growing up in a very artistic community. Like, not only an artistic community, a community of like believing Christians who are also artists, right? And so people who like a lot of the people that they were big fans of musically, and they would listen to their records or whatever, we would see them at church on a Sunday, and they would receive communion next to this person that they'd seen doing it. So they never had that weird like disintegration of kind of the artistic pursuits and the gospel. Like, those things were always lived in the same space for them. And so the cool thing is all three of our kids are involved in the arts in one way or another, and they're also all involved in the ministry in one way or another. Like, Asher is a great record producer and road manager, drummer, and so he's running sound for the Grey Havens here, or he's producing a record by this Christian artist here. Not always Christian artists, but like Aiden's like, illustrating books about the gospel. Sky's traveling and doing music. So they have this really healthy permission from a very early age that the things that lit them up, like the things that produced in them a kind of wonder, were absolutely a part of the participation of building the kingdom of God, and so it was all mixed in together. It was all in a wonderful messy jumble. And so I think that that's the best thing I would say, is that the church was never for them, as far as I know, seen as this like really stodgy thing. Like, I'm sure they fell asleep in plenty of church services, but I should say Christianity was never seen as a stodgy thing. Christianity was a source of wonder and hospitality and generosity and great art. Like our kids, Christian art gets a bad rap sometimes, and justifiably so sometimes. But man, there's also amazing art by Christians. And so we tried to draw our kids' attention to the great works, and to show them that, like, there's a way to do this without, having to resort to propaganda. You can make good art. And so I think that they kind of like, I don't think that they could articulate it at this point necessarily, but they do it. It's the water they swam in growing up.
Well, one of the things that's so clear about that is you as an artist, you make a lot of stuff, right? You are in this position where you are creating not only just a lot of different, you've made over, I think 15 albums or 10 albums, something like that. Like you have this book series, you have a movie deal coming, like you were making a lot of stuff. And it reminds me a lot of the, I'll say, struggle that our listeners have of like just trying to make it to a Sunday, because you are making all this stuff that I think if you get off track could easily become about like, let me make this thing for notoriety, or let me make this thing that the public wants. But you're making art and ministry that resonates with you clearly and deeply. I'm curious how you stay connected to that, your mission and the impact of what you do, rather than just the methodology of the stuff you make.
Yeah. I mean, this is going to sound trite, but going to church every Sunday is part of it. It's like being reminded of the truth of the gospel on a regular basis, taking seriously Christian friendship. It's one of the greatest things in the world. But at the same time, I would just say that, like, man, my motives are not always pure. They haven't been. When I look back at my 25-year-old self, I'm just like, gosh, what a knucklehead that guy was. Like, I was so, I was always scared. Like when I see pictures of myself with 2 toddlers and my wife standing in front of a van that we were like driving across America in to go do a concert for a love offering, I was terrified so much of the time that, like, part of the reason that I kept cranking out songs and music and started working on the books was like, I got to feed my family. And I'm so scared that if I stop, it's not going to happen, which, man, that as if I am the ultimate provider of my family, Right. And I also see in myself plenty of ambition, plenty of like, I want to be somebody, like I was connected way too much of my identity to what I was making. And so that's the bad news. The good news is the Lord redeems all that stuff. Like, so I think sometimes we put this pressure on ourselves to, like you said, stay connected, or to like Christian practices are a good thing. Discipleship is a good thing, all that. But like, ultimately, you're never going to have perfect motives. You're never going to get this right. You are a sinner. Right. And thank goodness God isn't waiting around for us to do it perfectly for him to inhabit the work that we're doing. Like somebody last night at this Q&A I was a part of was like asking about what we do with the fact that some of the greatest works of art by people like Mozart were made by people who were such scoundrels. And I was kind of like, that's true, but man, I'm a scoundrel. You're a scoundrel. Thank God. Like, just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you got it all in line. So like, I mean, God has never once stopped speaking through broken people and people whose motives are wrong. And so a lot of times I think we can get kind of hung up on that so much that we talk ourselves out of doing the thing, And for example, I think I had this in one of my books, like straight in front of me, my neighbor lives on the hill, and he's got this swath of grass that he has to mow all the time. And I knew that they had a funeral. They were having a reception for a funeral at their house. And I noticed that his grass wasn't mowed. And I was like, man, I should just go mow his grass today. And I was like, oh man, but I would be doing that to make him think that I was like this great guy. And after like, deliberating for like 5 minutes, I realized that I had almost talked myself out of doing a kind thing for my neighbor because I was wanting my motives to be pure. And so I finally was like, forget it. I'm just going to go mow the guy's yard. So I went and mowed it. And man, I've never mowed with such moral superiority. I was just like, does anyone see what a kind neighbor I am? Look how
mowing
good
the grass
of a guy
over here, mowing the grass.
Yeah, exactly. But the point is the grass got mowed, right? And my neighbor came over and he was like, thank you so much for doing that. And then the Lord sorts out all that stuff, mess in your heart on his own, but go do the thing,
Yeah.
So the doing is I guess my answer to that question is like, if you want to stay connected to the work of the Holy Spirit, he's a doer, right? Yeah. He also is a comforter, and there's a rest there. So, but there's a kind of doing that is necessary in order to force yourself to rest. Yeah. And so actually taking the step to change little bits of your life in order to walk in his ways and delight in his will, that's the thing. I'm reading James right now. I don't know if it sounds like it.
That's good. Well, Andrew, and forgive everybody, I'm just asking for permission that my dog is chewing a bone right in the middle of the living room here where I'm at. Again, moving, short on space. So if you hear a clunk, that's happening.
Yeah,
No
it's
problem.
not me chewing the bone. I appreciate you qualifying that, handler.
Yeah.
So listening, no.
But you mentioned Lewis, you mentioned McDonald, you mentioned Chesterton, amazing authors. You yourself, and Wendell Berry, of course, you yourself were moved, or were led to through the Spirit to write, young adult fiction. Tell us what brought on the desire and the discipline, because you could have a great idea, but you, as well as anybody else knows, to follow up that great idea with actually getting it done. It's just like, it takes work. The creativity doesn't just always freely flow, unfortunately. But that being said, tell us what led you to take on the Wingfeather saga, and what keeps you going, because making the animated picture, that's laborious at times.
You have no idea. It is so much more work than I ever thought it would be. It's amazing. It's so much fun. Yeah, I mean, part of that answer was what I said before, is I was just scared, and I was just like, I remember having the thought, it was around the time my second label album came out, and I'd been on the road a lot, and I'd always wanted to write a book anyway, and loved to read adventure stories when I was a kid, and even now, and I was just like, in the same way that, like, when I heard songs that I really loved, I wanted to know what it was like to write a song. I'd learn the song, and then I'd be like, okay, so somebody wrote this. How did they do that? And then I would kind of, look under the hood of the car to figure out like how this engine works. And so I think the same was true of writing. I just carried in me this desire to know what it was like to get to the other side of a big story. And so, yeah, part of it was me going, I don't know that it's hard to picture myself as a 65-year-old grandpa dragging my guitar through an airport to go do a show, right? But it is not hard to imagine myself as a grandpa who writes fairy tales.
That's good.
And so I was like, I think I would like to begin investing in this part of my curiosity, so that one day maybe I could, if I get tired of music, I can just focus on the books. And so to my great surprise, the books have done well, and I love it. In fact, that's part of the source of the struggle right now, is that as much as I love doing concerts and traveling, man, when you're writing a book, you get to have lunch with your wife. It's a ton of work, but you don't have to leave home to do it. And so, so I'm wrestling with that right now. So anyway, I wanted my kids to have a story. That was part of it. We read a lot as a family, and I couldn't quite find exactly the kind of book that I wanted to. I was like, man, I had read the Narnia books. Lord of the Rings is a little, in my opinion, not a great read aloud for little kids. And there wasn't a whole lot else out there,
Sure.
And we read a couple of N.D. Wilson books and whatever. We went down, Watership Down was a great one. But then I was just like, man, I want to write a book that will encourage families to sit around together and read a big story together. That's why the chapters are so short. Because any parent who's tried to read like Harry Potter or whatever, it's like, good grief, this is a 55-page chapter. It's the worst,
Yep.
So anyway, yeah, that was a big part of it. And also, I just believe that stories are one of the ways that God surprises us with the truth. And I wanted to see what would happen if I sat down without a hard agenda and write a story as a Christian and see what happened. And there you go.
I have to ask, I want to talk about the Child Discipleship Forum. I want to talk about the Rabbit Room, but where did the idea of sneaky book signings come from? I think that's hilarious to see you guys do that. I don't know. We may have to cut this out of the podcast. I don't know if you're even allowed to talk about it, but
no, I don't care. I got the idea from Neil Gaiman. You know who that is? Neil Gaiman. He's the guy that wrote like The Graveyard Book and Coraline. He's a fantasy novelist. But yeah, I followed him on Twitter or on Instagram for a minute, and he would do that. He would kind of like pop in, and some visual artists will do that. They'll like draw doodles and stick them in the pages of books that they've written, and then Instagram it so people can find it.
So if you don't know what I'm talking about, there's links in the show notes wherever you're listening or watching to Andrew's website and his social channels, and he does secret book signings. So go find Andrew's books, find his signature in there.
if I'm in a random city and I could find my books in like a Barnes and Noble or something, I used to ask permission and now I don't. I just go do it.
That's hilarious,
That's
man.
pretty. It appeals to the pastor's kid in me.
So I want to ask about the Rabbit Room, because one of the
Yeah.
things that I think is really compelling about what you're doing with the Rabbit Room is it mirrors a lot of the conversations happening with Child Discipleship Forum. So at the CDF, people are going to be able to experience belonging, right? Belonging with other leaders who are committed to the mission of child discipleship, like you are, and are trying to figure out what that looks like in the year 2022. And I would imagine one of the driving factors behind the creation of the Rabbit Room was simply to create that community kind of feel. Or is that a fair summation?
I think that's fair. Yeah. There's this famous C.S. Lewis quote where he talks about how friendship is born in that moment when one person says to another, "Oh, you too, I thought I was the only one."
Right.
And I think that the people who make up the constituency of like the Rabbit Room members, who they keep the gas in the engine, it's people who just carried around in them this like maybe secret loneliness, this feeling that, they couldn't find anybody else who loved stories the way that they did, or movies, or poetry, or felt like there wasn't anybody in their immediate community where they could really talk about some of these ideas, the way that God uses stories. And so that was how it started. And that was 16 years ago, and it's grown into this beautiful thing where we have a conference every year. We've published like 40 books at this point, and we keep scanning the horizon for people who are doing the kind of work that we love, right? Like when people say they don't like Christian books, I just want to be like, oh, you're just reading the wrong kind of Christian books. Like there are great Christian books, right? Or they don't like Christian music. I'm like, oh, have I got music for you? Because man, there's so many people kind of like in between the cracks. There's an author that I love who calls them borderlanders. This idea that there are people who, they're never going to be huge over here. They're too Christian for the mainstream. They're too not CCM enough for the Christian world. And so the Rabbit Room, kind of one of the things that we do is to try to draw attention to good and beautiful and excellent work that's often overlooked. Yeah. And we have noticed that a byproduct of that kind of activity is community, that people tend to gather around good work. And it's just been a source of friendship and solidarity, and a lot of wonderful things have been put into the world because of this amazing ministry.
It really has. And I would highly encourage people, check out the show notes, Andrew's website. You can learn more about the Rabbit Room. Also, you're on the Resurrection Letters tour now. The God of the Garden is out now. Like, I want to sort of wrap things up where we started, which is you are someone who has created, to use a business term, like a very diverse creative portfolio. And I find that so compelling because I think people who try to do that often experience mission drift. You often wind up sort of experiencing like, oh, actually, this isn't quite as true to who I am as a creator or true to the ministry. And despite the diversity of the platforms you use, it all clearly stems back to some of the stuff Mike was talking about earlier, and your connection to place, your connection to God through that. The last thing I want to ask specifically is, you are a faculty member of the Child Discipleship Forum. I'm really excited for people who are still listening, who have, are still listening to the podcast, right? You guys are some of our most avid fans, and I appreciate it. But why is the conversation for child discipleship so critical for you right now in the ministry, in the work that you do? You are someone who speaks at a lot of conferences, you play a lot of venues, and you're coming to the CDF. And that clearly matters to you. And how would you articulate why?
Well, it's funny. Just yesterday, I was speaking at a conference, the Summit Ministries. I don't know if you know Summit. And I was speaking, and it was a bunch of high school kids. And somebody asked me if I was intimidated by high schoolers. And I used to be like super intimidated by young people. Old people were easier for me. But now it's kind of changed. I get kind of excited about it because one of the things that I realize is that, this lecture I'm about to give might be the first time that some of these kids have ever heard this amazing idea that I got from C.S. Lewis, right? Like so many of us, when you talk to grown-ups, you can see people nodding because they've read those books, they've read the quotes, they kind of know, they've heard the sermon, And man, to be in a room full of people who haven't yet heard anybody articulate the gospel in exactly this way is really exciting to me. You know, I used to be nervous about it, but you know, there's a quote in Adorning the Dark that I got from George MacDonald, where he suggests this beautiful idea that God has this secret chamber in his heart that is reserved for each of us. That there's an Andrew chamber in the heart of God where nobody else gets to come. It's just me, right?
Mm.
And so I have this unique relationship with God. And I think that's true. It's like I have a unique relationship with each of my kids, even though I love them each exactly as much. And so McDonald says, you know, this is what we were called to. We're here to make known the secret things of the Father.
Yeah.
So all I have to do is go and tell them about what my relationship with Jesus is like, and there will be something in there that they've probably never heard from anybody else. And I think that's so exciting.
Well, we do too. Andrew, thank you so much for the time, man. Can't wait to shake your hand and meet you in September, whether you're joining us online or in person. Really, really grateful for the time, for your ministry. And thanks so much just for hanging out, dude. It was really nice.
Yeah, man. Great to talk to you guys. Thank you so much.